When I first learned that I had inherited my grandparents' $920,000 estate, people assumed I would feel joy, relief, maybe even excitement about what that kind of money could do. But the truth is, the first feeling that hit me wasn't celebration, it was weight. A weight that settled on my chest and wouldn't move. Because money in that amount isn't just numbers in a bank account, it isn't just a check with a lot of zeros. It's responsibility, legacy, and a test of character all wrapped into one. Some people dream about windfalls, thinking that money solves every problem, but anyone who has ever been handed a sum like that knows it can create just as many new problems as it solves. Suddenly, every decision you make is magnified, every move you take with it has long-term consequences, and one wrong choice can erase decades of your family's work and sacrifice. I thought back to my grandparents and the way they lived. They were not flashy people. They didn't come from privilege, and they never lived in excess. They built their estate through years of discipline, sacrifice, and choices that probably didn't feel glamorous at the time. While their neighbors upgraded cars every 3 years, they held on to theirs until it couldn't run anymore. While other families went on vacations abroad, my grandparents saved and reinvested. Their money didn't come from winning the lottery or striking it rich overnight. It came from being steady, patient, and committed. And so, inheriting that money didn't feel like free money to me. It felt like the weight of their entire lives being placed in my hands, with the question, would I respect their sacrifice or would I waste it? When people around me found out, the reactions said everything. Friends joked about what they would do with nearly $1 million. Some said they'd buy their dream car, others said they'd quit their jobs, a few even suggested I finally live a little. But what they didn't understand was that it wasn't their money. It wasn't built on their years of struggle, it wasn't tied to their family's legacy. For them, it was a hypothetical. For me, it was real. And the weight of that reality forced me to see it differently. Every dollar carried my grandparents' fingerprints. Every investment, every sacrifice they made to reach that number was now sitting in my hands. The hardest part about inheriting money like that is the noise. Everyone feels entitled to an opinion. Family members may have expectations. Friends may whisper about what they think you should do. Even strangers who find out assume you're lucky. But luck wasn't what built that estate, and luck wasn't going to preserve it. The weight wasn't just about the money itself. It was about the unspoken expectation to carry forward the discipline that created it in the first place. It's almost like inheriting a story, and suddenly you're the author expected to write the next chapter without ruining the plot. At night, I would lie awake running through scenarios in my head. What if I invested wrong? What if I trusted the wrong person? What if I let greed, or fear, or even carelessness wipe it all away? That weight wasn't just financial, it was emotional. It was the fear of letting down two people who had worked their entire lives to give me this opportunity. People think money brings freedom, but in that moment it felt like it brought chains. Not chains of restriction, but chains of duty. Because I couldn't just think about myself, I had to think about what that money represented, about what my grandparents would have wanted me to do with it, and about the example it would set for the generations that come after me. The truth is, when you inherit money, it's not just your bank account that changes, it's your identity. Suddenly, you are no longer just who you were yesterday. You are the person carrying your family's financial legacy. Every dollar you spend is a reflection of whether or not you respect that legacy. That's the weight no one talks about. People romanticize inheritances, but they don't talk about the guilt that comes with the thought of spending even a dime frivolously, or the anxiety of trying to make choices that will make the money last, or the quiet pressure of living up to the standards of those who built it. I realized that inheritance is a test. It's not about how much money you receive, but about what you choose to do when you receive it. It's easy to squander, easy to impress others with quick flashes of wealth, easy to fall into the trap of thinking the money will never run out. The real test is whether you can withstand that temptation, whether you can stand up to the noise around you, and whether you can honor the weight of what you've been given without crumbling under it. Because when you inherit not just dollars, but decades of sacrifice, the question becomes less about what the money can do for you, and more about whether you are strong enough to hold it, protect it, and grow it without betraying the people who earned it. When the news spread that I had inherited my grandparents' estate, the way people reacted told me more about human nature than I ever expected. Suddenly, people I hadn't spoken to in years started calling, sending messages, and showing up with smiles that felt a little too wide. They didn't ask me how I was processing it. They didn't ask me what it meant to me emotionally. They asked what I was going to buy, what I was going to do, and how fast I was going to spend it. The assumptions people made were fascinating. To them, nearly $1 million meant instant upgrades, new cars, designer clothes, a bigger house, exotic vacations. They spoke as if the inheritance was a winning lottery ticket, as if the only logical thing to do was to start showing off. Their expectations were built on the fantasy of sudden wealth, but I couldn't bring myself to see it the same way. I remember sitting in a room full of friends when one of them laughed and said, "Man, if I were you, I'd never work another day in my life." Everyone nodded in agreement, throwing out ideas like investing in flashy startups, buying the latest sports car, or throwing parties that would make me the center of attention. On the surface, it sounded like fun. For a moment, I tried to imagine myself doing those things, living loudly, proving I had money, letting the world know that I was now in a different category. But deep down, I stayed quiet. I didn't respond with excitement or share what I was thinking, because what I was thinking didn't match what they wanted to hear. The truth was, I didn't want to be the person who burned through a fortune just to keep up appearances. I had seen too many examples of people who inherited money or came into sudden wealth, only to have it disappear within years, sometimes months. They had chased validation instead of stability, and in the end, they had nothing left to show. That silence of mine, that refusal to jump into the fantasy everyone else had for me, was my way of protecting not just the money, but my own peace of mind. Because when you inherit money, you also inherit everyone's expectations, and if you're not careful, you'll end up living their dreams instead of your own. What made it even more complicated was the unspoken judgment that came with my silence. When I didn't respond with wild plans or announce some extravagant purchase, some people assumed I was being secretive, others thought I was ungrateful, and a few even hinted that I might be selfish for not sharing in ways they expected. It's almost as if they believed my inheritance was community property, something that should be spread around to validate their friendship or their connection to me. But I knew better. I knew that money like that disappears quickly when too many hands and too many voices get involved. My silence was not avoidance, it was strategy. By keeping quiet, I was able to think clearly, away from the noise, away from the pressure to perform with my money. The most powerful lesson I learned during that time was that money reveals people. It reveals who really cares about you and who only cares about what you can do for them. It reveals who sees you as a person and who sees you as an opportunity. And it also reveals your own values, because you're forced to decide whether you'll give in to the expectations of others or stay grounded in what truly matters to you. For me, staying quiet became a shield. It protected me from making impulsive decisions, it protected me from unnecessary attention, and it allowed me to move with intention instead of pressure. There were times I felt tempted to respond to the noise, to prove that I could live large, to silence the whispers with some bold move. But every time I thought about it, I pictured my grandparents and the way they lived. They didn't spend their lives worrying about what others thought, and they didn't build their estate by chasing validation. They built it by staying consistent, by ignoring the noise, and by trusting their own judgment. So how could I honor their legacy by doing the exact opposite? My silence became my answer, my quiet refusal to be pushed into reckless choices. That silence, however, came with its own challenges. People don't like it when you don't play into their expectations. Some grew distant, some grew resentful, and some even tried to pressure me into opening up about what I was really doing with the money. But I held my ground, because I realized that the louder the world around you gets, the more valuable silence becomes. It gives you space to think, to plan, and to remember that wealth isn't about proving anything to anyone. It's about protecting something that was built with sacrifice, about making sure it doesn't slip through your fingers because you were too busy trying to please people who would disappear the moment the money was gone. I had seen it too many times before. People come into a large sum of money and before they even realize it, it's gone. Fast money really does go fast, and it almost always goes even faster when it wasn't earned through years of sweat, sacrifice, and steady effort. There's something about easy money that tricks people into believing it will always be there. I had friends who got settlements, people I knew who received insurance payouts, or even smaller inheritances, and the story was always the same. The first few weeks were filled with excitement, big purchases, and showing off. The months that followed were filled with regret, debts, and confusion about how it all disappeared so quickly. Watching those stories unfold was like a warning sign for me, flashing bright and bold. Don't repeat their mistakes. When the inheritance came, I kept replaying those examples in my head. I remembered a cousin who once came into a six-figure payout after an accident. At first, it seemed like she had finally caught a break. She bought a new car, moved into a bigger apartment, and started living a lifestyle she could never afford before. Within a year, she was broke again, struggling to pay rent, and the car was repossessed. I thought about another friend who inherited a small piece of land and quickly sold it just to get his hands on the cash. Within months, the money was gone, spent on things that had no long-term value. These stories weren't unique, they were common. And the common thread in all of them was that people treated the money like it would never end. They thought of it as a bottomless well, not realizing how quickly a well can run dry when you keep drawing from it without ever refilling. That awareness shaped the way I looked at my inheritance. I knew I couldn't fall into the same trap of thinking about what I could buy right now. I had to think about what I wanted the money to look like in 10 years, in 20 years, in 30 years. It wasn't just about resisting the urge to splurge, it was about recognizing that this was an opportunity to break a cycle. Too many families see wealth pass through their hands like sand slipping through fingers here one generation, gone the next. My grandparents had worked their entire lives to build something that lasted, and I realized I had the chance to make sure it didn't stop with me. The cycle of fast money gone fast is rooted in mindset. People often treat sudden wealth like a reward, something to be consumed. They think of it as their chance to finally live big. But that mindset turns the money into fuel for a short-term fire. The fire burns bright and fast, and then it leaves behind nothing but ashes. I wanted a different approach. I wanted to think of the money as a seed, not fuel. A seed has the power to grow, to multiply, to produce something far greater than itself if it's nurtured properly. But if you crush the seed or eat it too early, you lose the chance for growth forever. I reminded myself constantly that the money I inherited wasn't an accident. It wasn't luck. It was built by people who made decisions over decades to save, to invest wisely, and to delay gratification when it would have been easier to give in to desire. They could have spent it. They could have taken the flashy vacations, bought new cars, and lived a louder life. But they didn't. They chose patience, and that patience created the estate that landed in my hands. If I blew it in a few years, it wouldn't just be a mistake, it would be a betrayal of everything they stood for. Breaking the cycle also meant confronting the culture around me. We live in a world that glorifies spending. Social media makes it seem like everyone is living luxuriously, upgrading constantly, and enjoying life to the fullest. What people don't show is the debt behind the photos, the anxiety behind the scenes, and the emptiness that comes when the money is gone. I knew if I followed that path, I'd end up with the same hollow story as so many others. But if I broke the cycle, if I held firm to the idea that money wasn't meant to be burned, but to be built, then I could change not only my life, but the lives of those who would come after me. There were temptations, of course. There were moments where I thought, maybe just one big purchase won't hurt. Maybe a new car would be fine, or a luxury trip to celebrate. But then I thought about those warnings again, those stories of people who started with just one purchase and ended with nothing left. Breaking the cycle meant saying no when it would have been easy to say yes. It meant holding onto the bigger vision instead of chasing the thrill of the moment. It meant carrying the discipline of my grandparents forward instead of allowing the money to become another sad story of wealth that slipped away. The moment I decided to move the money strategically instead of spending it recklessly, everything shifted. Most people think wealth is about how much money you have, but the truth is, it's about how you move it. Money sitting in a checking account looks impressive, but it's stagnant. Money thrown into shiny purchases might feel exciting, but it's temporary. The real power comes from putting money where it can grow quietly, where every dollar works harder tomorrow than it does today. That was the mindset I adopted, and it changed the way I viewed the entire inheritance. I spent weeks studying, reading, and speaking to people who understood money better than I did. The temptation to jump into fast, risky investments was there, but I reminded myself that the goal wasn't to chase thrills, it was to build security. That meant thinking carefully about where the money would be safe, how it would multiply over time, and how it could create freedom without being drained by impulse decisions. It wasn't about ignoring the idea of living well, it was about ensuring that living well could be sustained, not just for a year or two, but for decades. One of the first steps I took was dividing the inheritance in my mind into categories. A portion of it had to be preserved, untouched, almost sacred, like the foundation of a house. Another portion could be allocated for growth, placed into investments that had the potential to expand over time. And a smaller portion could be set aside for flexibility, for opportunities that might come my way or for needs that I couldn't predict. By separating the money like that, I gave it structure, and that structure gave me peace of mind. Instead of staring at one giant lump sum and feeling overwhelmed, I broke it down into manageable parts, each with a purpose. The strategic movement of money also required me to be brutally honest with myself. I had to admit what I didn't know, where my weaknesses were, and where I could make costly mistakes if I acted out of pride. Too many people inherit money and assume they suddenly know everything about wealth. They get caught up in the illusion of expertise because the number in their account makes them feel powerful. But that's where fortunes vanish, when ego replaces strategy. I chose humility instead. I chose to listen, to learn, and to take advice from those who had already proven they could make money grow and last. There was something incredibly powerful about watching the inheritance transform from a static number into a living tool. Once I started moving it strategically, it no longer felt like a heavy burden. It felt like an opportunity. Every time I placed money in the right spot, I felt like I was planting seeds in fertile soil. They weren't sprouting overnight, but I knew with time and patience they would grow into something greater. And in that process, I realized that wealth wasn't about speed, it was about direction. As long as the money was moving with intention, it was moving the right way. Another key part of the strategy was protecting the money. It wasn't just about growth, it was about defense. Too many people forget that wealth needs to be shielded as much as it needs to be multiplied. That meant avoiding unnecessary risks, staying away from people who only saw me as a walking bank account, and keeping my moves quiet. The less people knew, the safer the money was. Silence became a form of strategy too. I didn't owe anyone explanations, and I didn't need to prove my decisions to anyone. The money wasn't for validation, it was for building a life where validation didn't matter. The process also forced me to think long-term in a way I never had before. It wasn't just about what I wanted now, it was about what I wanted in 10 years, in 20 years, and even about what I wanted to leave behind. Strategic money moves aren't made for the present version of you, they're made for the future version you hope to become. Every choice I made with the inheritance was a message to my future self. I believe in you, and I'm setting you up to win. That perspective alone kept me grounded whenever I felt the urge to make a short-sighted decision. Moving the money strategically didn't mean living like a monk or denying myself completely. It meant striking a balance where the money worked harder than I did. It meant creating a system where I could enjoy stability today while building strength for tomorrow. It meant turning a lump sum that could have vanished in a few years into a foundation that would support not only me, but possibly even the generations that would come after me. And it all came down to one principle: money isn't powerful when it's loud, it's powerful when it's moving quietly in the right direction. When I thought about what to do with the inheritance, the idea that kept coming back to me was legacy over lifestyle. I knew I could have taken that money and instantly elevated the way I lived. I could have upgraded my car, moved into a bigger house, bought the designer clothes I used to walk past in store windows, and filled my life with things that screamed success to everyone watching. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that lifestyle fades. Cars get old, houses need repairs, clothes go out of style, and the applause of people who notice your spending eventually dies out. Legacy, on the other hand, doesn't fade. Legacy lasts long after the moment has passed, and it carries a weight that lifestyle never can. That was the choice in front of me. Did I want temporary validation or lasting impact? I remembered my grandparents and the way they lived. They weren't the type to chase luxury. They lived modestly, even when they could have afforded more. Their house wasn't the biggest on the block, their clothes weren't designer, and their vacations were often simple road trips instead of extravagant getaways. And yet, they had something far more valuable than appearances: respect. People admired them for their discipline, for their wisdom, and for their ability to create stability in a world that often felt uncertain. That respect didn't come from how they dressed or what they drove, it came from how they lived their values. They built a legacy that wasn't just about money, but about the way they carried themselves, and the inheritance was proof of that. If I had chosen lifestyle, I would have been betraying that legacy. It would have been like throwing away the very principles that had built the estate in the first place. Lifestyle is loud, and it impresses people for a moment, but it doesn't last. Legacy is quiet, and it shapes generations. I wanted to build on what my grandparents had started. I wanted to take what they left behind and multiply it, not just in terms of dollars, but in terms of meaning. Because one day, when I'm gone, I don't want people to say, "He lived well." I want them to say, "He honored what was given to him, and he left something behind that made others' lives better." Legacy also meant thinking beyond myself. It meant looking at the inheritance not as a chance to indulge, but as a chance to provide. Maybe it could help future children or grandchildren go to school without debt. Maybe it could support causes my grandparents cared about, extending their influence into communities they never had the chance to reach. Maybe it could become the kind of financial cushion that prevents the next generation from repeating the struggles of the past. Lifestyle would have ended with me, but legacy could outlive me. That thought gave me clarity about what direction I needed to go. There were moments when I was tempted to blur the lines. I thought, what if I do both? What if I spend some on lifestyle and still save some for legacy? But the more I thought about it, the more I realized how slippery that slope could be. Lifestyle has a way of growing. One purchase leads to another, one upgrade makes the next one feel necessary, and before long, the lifestyle consumes more than you ever intended. Legacy, on the other hand, requires discipline, patience, and sacrifice. It requires you to say no in the moment so that the impact can stretch further into the future. That discipline felt truer to my grandparents' spirit, and it felt truer to who I wanted to become. Focusing on legacy also gave me a different sense of fulfillment than lifestyle ever could. Every time I made a decision that protected or grew the inheritance, I felt like I was having a conversation with my grandparents, telling them silently, "I get it. I see what you were building, and I won't let it die with me." That feeling was worth more than any material thing I could have bought. It wasn't about showing off, it was about honoring. It wasn't about taking, it was about building. And that gave me a sense of pride that no lifestyle upgrade could match. In a world that constantly pushes us to consume, to display, to show proof of our success through material things, choosing legacy over lifestyle feels almost rebellious. It's choosing patience over instant gratification, depth over appearances, meaning over noise. It's deciding that what you leave behind matters more than what you show off right now. That became my guiding principle with the inheritance, and it shaped every move I made with it. Because I didn't just inherit money, I inherited a story. And that story deserved to be carried forward, not drowned out by the temporary applause of a lifestyle that could vanish as quickly as it appeared. When I finally looked back at the decision I had made, the surprising results spoke louder than any announcement I could have given at the beginning. Moving the inheritance quietly, resisting the urge to chase lifestyle, and protecting the legacy didn't just keep the money safe, it reshaped the way I lived and the way my family saw me. At first, some people thought I was being too cautious. They expected me to make a splash, to show off what had been passed down to me. Instead, what they saw was silence, discipline, and choices that didn't make headlines. But as time passed, the impact became undeniable. The inheritance started to grow in ways that were steady but powerful. Money that could have disappeared in a matter of months began to generate returns, slow at first, then stronger as the years built momentum. I saw numbers change in ways that reminded me of my grandparents' patience, that quiet, long-term view they lived by. It wasn't about doubling overnight or striking it rich with one risky move. It was about compounding, about letting time do the heavy lifting. And in that process, I realized that the inheritance had stopped being just a financial gift. It had become a tool, one that worked for me while I slept, while I worked, and while life carried on. What surprised me the most was how the decision affected my sense of peace. Instead of the anxiety that often comes with sudden money, fear of losing it, fear of making the wrong move, fear of being taken advantage of, I felt grounded. Every choice I had made was intentional, and because of that, I didn't walk around worrying that the money was slipping away. I wasn't tied to a lifestyle I couldn't maintain, I wasn't carrying the burden of debt from impulsive spending, and I wasn't looking over my shoulder wondering if people were only around me because of what I could give them. That kind of peace is hard to measure in dollars, but it was one of the greatest returns I could have ever asked for. Another surprising result was the shift in how people around me responded over time. At first, my quiet approach frustrated some people. They thought I was hiding something or that I wasn't being generous enough. But as the years passed, the same people who had pushed me toward flashy spending started asking me for advice. They saw the stability I had built, the fact that I hadn't blown through the inheritance, and they began to realize that my silence had been strategy all along. The whispers of doubt turned into respect, and respect is something money can't buy. The inheritance also began to create opportunities that I couldn't have imagined at the beginning. Because I had moved the money strategically, it positioned me to say yes to things that aligned with my values. Whether it was supporting causes that mattered to me, helping family members in ways that didn't jeopardize my future, or reinvesting into projects that had the potential to create long-term impact, the money gave me flexibility and power. And because I hadn't chained myself to an expensive lifestyle, I wasn't trapped by the need to keep up appearances. That freedom was one of the most valuable outcomes of all. What truly surprised me, though, was the way the decision redefined my understanding of wealth. For so long, I thought of wealth as a number. I thought it was the size of a bank account, the kind of house you lived in, the kind of car you drove. But through this process, I learned that wealth is really about choices. It's about the freedom to decide your path, the ability to protect your future, and the chance to influence the lives of others in meaningful ways. By choosing legacy over lifestyle, by moving the money with strategy instead of noise, I discovered a form of wealth that went beyond numbers. It became about stability, impact, and dignity. Even my family's perspective shifted. Where there might have been suspicion or envy at first, there grew a sense of shared pride. They saw that I hadn't treated the inheritance as a personal jackpot, but as a responsibility. They saw that the choices I made honored my grandparents and extended their story into the present. Instead of being a point of conflict, the inheritance became a point of unity, something that reminded all of us that discipline and vision could create a future stronger than the past. And that was perhaps the most surprising result of all, that by staying quiet, by resisting the noise, I had built not just financial security but a foundation of respect, peace, and opportunity that would echo far beyond me.